But now on to Lebanon, which is very much a part of this regional war. Israel's escalation in Lebanon reached a major turning point yesterday after Iran reportedly threatened to suspend talks with the U.S. if Israel followed through on threats to bomb the southern suburbs of Beirut. Trump appeared to take that very, very seriously enough to rein in the Israelis, at least for now, saying that Beirut is basically off limits and that de-escalation could follow. He said if Hezbollah holds its fire, Israel has continued to bomb southern Lebanon, though, and Hezbollah has, as it has a right to, continue to respond. Meanwhile, the Lebanese government just met with Israeli counterparts in Washington, D.C. at the State Department for these so-called direct negotiations that are not exactly representative of the U.S. government or of the Lebanese people. They're trying to basically separate the Lebanon front from the Iran-U.S. talks and keep Lebanon out of any broader regional settlement. But a new poll, which is what we're going to be talking about in this segment, a new poll by Professor Jad Melki, director of the Institute of Media Research and Training at Lebanese American University, suggests that this does not reflect where most Lebanese people actually stand, especially when it comes to Israel, the U.S., Iran, resistance, and Palestine. Jad joins us today to talk about the significance of his findings. Jad, welcome to Breakthrough News. It's so good to have you.
Thanks, Rania. Thanks, Zoe.
And you are talking to us, of course, from Beirut. And before we get to your poll, I kind of want to ask you about your thoughts on the latest news, because like I mentioned, Trump has claimed that he negotiated a new arrangement between the Israelis and the Lebanese to prevent Israeli attacks specifically on Beirut, saying that if that works, maybe eventually it will lead to de-escalation across the country. But it requires, not just Israel refraining from striking Beirut, but also Hezbollah to hold its fire. The details around that remain a bit murky, including whether that applies to only cross-border raids by Hezbollah or against any attacks on Israeli troops that are occupying Lebanese territory in the south. So I'm curious, what do you make of this new arrangement? And do you think it suggests that Lebanon is in fact being negotiated as part of this broader regional settlement between the Iranians and the Americans?
So the last thing I checked in the news is that they started the meeting in DC. The statements from Trump, I don't like to comment on those because 5 minutes later they change and flip and become contradictory. So the only thing I can comment on are the stable comments. That's the comments of the statements of the resistance, and the Iranian statements have been steadfast. The resistance has rejected the deal that in return for not striking Beirut, the resistance will not strike occupied North Palestine. They have rejected it in, I think, some 12 statements today. And I think the Americans have understood the message. The Iranians have been very steadfast behind that position too. So we have to wait and see what's going to happen. But we know where we stand. We have no idea where Trump stands right now or in 5 minutes or tomorrow morning. Who knows?
Yeah, it's like, again, it's Trump's world and we're kind of just responding to it. But, your research, Jad, is extremely important in this regard because you're actually, polling and getting the sentiments of the people within your country. And your poll did find that 87% of respondents agreed that Israel is their enemy. 51% viewed the United States as their enemy and 38% viewed Iran as their enemy. At the same time, there were more complicated divisions over tactics. You found that 54% agreed diplomacy is the only path to liberation, 35% supported armed resistance as the only path, and 51% agreed that Israel should be destroyed, while 34% supported signing a peace agreement with Israel. So that's a lot. What stood out to you most in these results, and what do they tell us about Lebanese public opinion at this moment?
So let's start with the first part about the 87 or close to 90% enmity towards Israel. I'm actually not surprised from that result. Several years ago and several months ago, we've had the same results when it comes to Israel. What really bothered me and what was the incentive to run this study is that if you watch the media, you'd think that most of the country has become with Israel, but it's really actually a bunch of media outlets, mostly TV stations that have been funded by Western resources, that keeps spewing propaganda and trying to change public opinion towards that. But that's not a very easy thing to do with Lebanon. But what actually struck me are the results towards the US and Iran. I was actually expecting the opposite. I was expecting maybe 50 to 60 enmity towards Iran, and maybe 30 to 40 enmity towards the US. But those numbers were actually flipped. And I had to double check, quadruple check these numbers. I was quite shocked. And I even looked back at other studies to see what's happening with the image of the US, with the international sentiment towards the US. This is a very clear message to the United States in the world today. Sentiment towards the United States has been plummeting since the Obama era. It was actually somewhere positive around 60, 65%. Right now, it's in the 30s, somewhere in between 30 and mid 30. And there are two and only two reasons to blame for that: the Trump administration and policy, but more so the Israeli genocidal regime. The US right now is paying the price for supporting this genocidal, psychopathic regime and all its crimes, and for funding it and sending it weapons and supporting it and covering its crimes. This is what's happening, and this should be a very clear alert to the US. If the US wants to keep or bring back its positive standing, there needs to be a lot of change in policy, especially foreign policy, and change of support to this genocidal regime.
You know, your poll also broke down some differences between class, generations, and different religious sects. But despite those differences, because there was some differences depending on who you asked, one thing that remained overwhelmingly strong across the board in Lebanese society was this opposition to Israel. So I'm curious if you can maybe talk a little bit about what stood out most to you about those divisions, and what do they tell us about where Lebanese public opinion is headed?
Sure, absolutely. Let me clarify one thing, that what we did not measure public opinion, we measured something deeper, which we call political attitude. Political attitude is not quickly changing. It's strong. It's not very easily affected by the media. It lasts for much longer. You need campaigns and propaganda over years to change political attitude. While political opinion is very superficial, can often change very rapidly from one day to another. So these numbers will last for a long time. And as you said earlier, some of these numbers look as if they're a bit contradictory, but you can easily explain them. The overwhelming enmity towards Israel, and then the other number that says that only 35% support armed resistance, while some 50% support diplomacy. This is what Lebanese think about dealing with Israel. So there's a big chunk of Lebanese who believe the only way to deal with Israel is the same way they've been doing to us, with military arms, with armed resistance. While the others, and I understand their sentiment, because they are afraid, they're worried. They feel that this country is much stronger than us, so we need to figure out a different way to deal with them, and they choose diplomacy. But unfortunately, diplomacy has not worked for many other countries, especially Palestine in this part of the world, specifically with this genocidal Israeli regime. So this is what explains somewhat of the some of the differences. And you can also see differences between religious communities, differences between economic level, and differences between age. What I'm actually glad to see is the young generation carries the highest level of enmity towards Israel, the highest level of support for armed resistance, the lowest level of support for a quote-unquote peace agreement with Israel. And that is very refreshing. And I can attribute that directly to October 7, to the operation that happened on October 7, that triggered and brought attention to what is happening in Palestine, to the century-old suffering in Palestine. I can see that even in my kids. At one point in 2020, 2021, we felt that Palestine is no longer a thing. Nobody's talking about it. And then October 7 happened, Al-Aqsa flood operation. And I was actually surprised to find out that two of my daughters actually were arrested in the US for protesting for Free Palestine. And a big part of me was worried, but a big part of me was also proud and happy to see, oh, wow, this issue is back on the conscious of young people's minds. So that is one of some of the reflections of the divisions in the findings.
Yeah, that's super important to hear. And I also thought it was super interesting that even across sect, of course, things varied slightly, but there was still that majority, sees Israel as the enemy. And that's despite this kind of elite discourse that we see in across Lebanese media. I mean, much of Lebanon's political, financial, and media establishment pushes, as you know, this very strong anti-Iran, pro-American narrative that often portrays normalization with the Israelis as this kind of like inevitable thing or something that's desirable. And, there's figures like Anton Sahnawi, who is a Lebanese banker who's currently dating Morgan Ortagus, who was appointed a Trump appointee to be an envoy for the region, and calls himself a Christian Zionist. This guy has funded media outlets and political projects across Lebanon that are aligned with that vision I just described towards normalization and against resistance, while really being celebrated in Washington as someone who represents the Lebanese people. Yet, your polls show this overwhelming hostility to Israel, again, across these different divides, and significant skepticism, as you described, towards the U.S. So I wanted to know, why do you think there's you kind of already explained it, the reason there's a disconnect between the views of Lebanon's elites and the views of ordinary Lebanese. But I wanted to ask you, what role has the media played in shaping opinions in Lebanon? Because opinions have changed slightly, and it is quite dangerous. But then again, it's still failing. And I guess maybe that's kind of self-evident, but why is it failing?
So let's actually highlight one very important finding, is that mainstream or traditional or legacy media has fallen for the first time so much behind, to the point that that was another shocking finding. I've been doing opinion surveys and political attitude surveys and media uses surveys since 2013 in Lebanon. Every couple of years we do something like that. And every single time, television has topped the list of all the media. Somewhere between 85 and 90% of the public say television is their main source of information for news. This war is the first time in history that we saw that television dropped down to the mid 30%, while social media, especially WhatsApp groups, I know that's not very popular in the US today, but in Lebanon, that is the main source of news today for most Lebanese. It just drastically jumped up. So there's a lot of change in the media landscape. And I even sensed that today with some media owners and media producers contacting me and asking me about these polls. They were very worried. I don't know, maybe they're worried they're going to lose their funding from Sahnawi, or they're going to lose their jobs or businesses. So probably. There's a lot of dispersion of information now. It's not concentrated in a few hands like it used to be before. And I also want to say that in the US, I mean, I'm very thankful for media outlets like you. I mean, we call your operation alternative media, but there's also a lot of others. I can think of The Intercept, Double Down, Mondevice. You have made the big difference in public opinion since October 7. And this was actually very clear even before we started doing the surveys. And one of the reasons why we did the surveys, I even wrote about these alternative media in my book that came out recently, but I wrote that 2 years ago, that the public consumption of media around the world has drastically changed, and people tend to go and flock to media that reflect their ideologies and their beliefs. So the influence of propaganda is very limited today, especially when you see that the battleground, the battles in the field are shifting the opinion more than what the news anchor is saying, more than what the politician is going up and saying. One video with these FPV drones showing an Israeli tank being blown up or a bunch of Israelis running away, That is more powerful propaganda than a million newscasts, than all of these TV stations in Lebanon. That gives high morale to the fighters, to the supporters of the resistance, devastates the Israeli army and its supporters and its politicians. In fact, the Israeli generals and politicians are panicking from these FPV drones. The Americans, the Pentagon, just yesterday announced that they're looking for different companies to develop these what they call killer drones. So everybody is now seeking those. This is the real propaganda. This is what synchronizes the military and the media machine. The world has changed. Whatever Sahnawi is paying for all these millions of dollars, and by the way, I know that he specifically has paid for multiple radio stations in Lebanon. And if you look at the percentage of people who follow radio stations, it's dead. It's dead. Newspapers have died in Lebanon. Radio stations now are dead. That's like 1 to 3% of people still following radio for news. So he can go and spend all the money that he stole from our banks, from our savings, when the banks collapsed in Lebanon, and waste it on the propaganda that's going to be very useless.
Well, interesting. We'll just use the moment to promote the exciting news today, which is that People's Dispatch and Breakthrough News are joining forces and, being an even more formidable institution in this media battle that you're alluding to. But going back to your poll and some of the findings, in this context, in this past couple of months, especially, we've seen this, that the U.S. government appears that it is attempting to try to recruit elements or, the Lebanese government and parts of the Lebanese state into its war on Hezbollah, sort of like a Palestinian Authority model where local institutions are pressured to police resistance or even declare war on them on behalf of Israel. Based on your research and what you know about Lebanese society, will this model actually work in Lebanon, or is this proposal and model going to run into resistance?
Well, it ran into resistance before in 1982 when the Israelis tried to impose a president on Lebanon and a government that will serve the Israeli interests. Look, this is a strategy that empire has always tried to use. You find a small elite in a country, usually a minority group that is sometimes hated by the public. You support it. That group sucks the money and the resources of the country and gives the empire the biggest chunk. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen in Lebanon. We're not going to have house slaves. I think that's the word that will serve the Israeli occupier or the empire of the world, the colonial empire of the world. It's not going to happen. I know the Lebanese, I know my people. We actually would rather keep fighting until the end, and we have been doing that, and we have been winning. I think the Israelis and the Americans need to learn from history. When the Israelis occupied Beirut and came in thinking that the Lebanese are going to welcome them in open arms, and they went into cafes and restaurants and started, they thought they're on a tourist operation. And very quickly, just regular Lebanese citizens pulled out crude weapons and started shooting at them. And just a few weeks later, they were crying on these speakers, like, please don't shoot at us, we are leaving. So even with a worst case scenario that is even a fantasy of Netanyahu today, if the current resistance for some strange reason, I don't think that could even happen right now. They have been advancing with military operations, with everything. Even if they for some reason stop or give up, there's going to be another group that comes out. They did that first with the Palestinians. They claimed that the Palestinians are the reasons why we're occupying Lebanon and we're going to kick them out, blah, blah, blah. And then we saw what happened. And now they're doing the same thing. They're claiming, it's Hezbollah, it's the resistance, it's the Shia community. They keep on coming up with different excuses. But look at the results. Really look at the results, and you'll find a big chunk of the public from all religions, from all classes, from all ages, from all communities support the armed resistance and believe that Israel is the enemy and want it out.
Well, Jad, I really, really, really appreciate your analysis. And this poll is so important. So really appreciate that you carried it out. It's much needed in this moment as we await to see what this next round of fake negotiations between the Lebanese government and the Israelis comes out with. We hope to have you back on again soon. Really appreciate you, and stay safe out there because you are talking to us from Lebanon.
Thanks, Rania. Thanks, Zoe.